So what I want to focus on now are closing techniques, some of which you'll be able to use all the way through the process of talking to a client or a candidate, and some of which you will use at the end of a process to see if a candidate is going to accept a job or a client is going to offer a candidate. What you'll find is the closing techniques that come at the end of the process are largely much more successful if you've adapted your vocabulary and the way you communicate with people to include the closing techniques that are possible to use all the way through the process. If you think about the objections and the three core areas of an objection that we've already discussed earlier on in the training, which are desire, belief and understanding, i.e. does an individual want something, how do they think about it and what do they feel about it, you have to ask questions as you're selling to people all the way through the process that are called trial closing questions. And that will enable you to understand whether someone's coming on the journey with you and you've handled an objection and it's okay to move forward towards an end of a sale, or whether that objection still exists. Now, the words that you can adapt into your vocabulary to figure out if you've handled those objections, which are at this stage small objections, like someone doesn't quite understand something, or someone doesn't quite believe it's the right thing for them, you want to invite those objections in, and after you think you've handled each of those questions, you want to finish with a trial closing question along the lines of, do you understand? Or are you with me? Or does that make sense? Or any version of that that you feel comfortable saying that is going to get a confirmation from the individual of a yes, they do understand, or they are with you and they do believe what you're saying. So you should start to pepper all of your conversations after you've made a statement with a trial close question. And then you also need to listen to whatever the answer is. So if you ask someone if they're with you or they understand it and they say no or I'm not sure, you want to find out why. This enables you again to try and handle the objection and then follow up with another trial close question. So those elements of trial closing should flow all the way through your sales process. And you should make sure during every call, after each statement of information you provided someone, you ask a comfortable trial close question. Now at this stage, you're looking to make sure you've handled all objections, and when you move to the end of a major close, there should be nothing that crops up that you haven't already explored around desire, belief and understanding in the job, because every time you speak to someone you should be covering that and asking small trial close questions. Another piece of terminology to try and build into your vocabulary is to ask someone about their opinion. Now, opinions can change, but facts are a little bit difficult to move. So if you ask someone, in your opinion right now, how do you feel about something, they can tell you in their opinion right now what their feelings are, but it's not a definitive fact. So by prefixing questions around someone's current opinion, it enables you to still move those opinions, because opinions are more likely to change than facts. If somebody says it doesn't feel good, that's a lot harder to change than, in my opinion now it's not quite right. So if you start to build into your vocabulary when you're asking someone, or asking a client for instance, in your opinion are they currently the #1 candidate? That's slightly different psychology and questioning process to asking someone, are you going to hire them? And it enables you to flesh out any objections and move forward and change someone's opinions, rather than asking them for a specific statement of fact which you want to save to the end of the process to ensure that you've covered off all the objections all the way through. There's another cute little phrase that you can use, in your opinion, and then ask the question, which enables you to shift people's opinions a lot easier. Another different type of close that you're probably going to come up against, which could come all the way through the process or right at the end, is called a sharp angle close. Now, typically, this is when someone's looking for a concession on something. So it might revolve around terms and conditions, it might revolve around salary, it might revolve around an offer. But what the relationship with this is, someone is going to ask you for something. Can you do this for me? And the sharp angle close is when you turn that back into gaining a commitment immediately from them, where you say, if I could do that, would that mean that you would 100% accept? Or would that mean that you would definitely move forward? Would that mean that you would definitely give me the business? So the only way that you're going to give them the concession is in return if they commit to moving forward with whatever it is that you want them to do. Now, in order to do that, you've got to know that you can move forward, but the way that you couch that and prevent that from being an immediate commitment is to say, if I did that, would you do this? So if they say yes, you can then still go away and say, okay, let me find out if I can do that, and then I'll come back to you. So that's called a sharp angle close, where you immediately turn a potential objection from a candidate or a client into an opportunity to make them commit to 100% move forward as long as you can meet that objection. The next thing we're going to look at now is an assumptive close. Now, if you've been dealing with a candidate all the way through a process and you've got to know specifically what their aspirations and expectations are, you can start to become assumptive with them. You can also do this around times and dates of interviews and all sorts of other things. And this is quite helpful if you can start to move a relationship to this place where you can assume a candidate's answers or a client's answers and therefore tell them you've behaved in a certain way. Because actually it starts to make people feel comfortable about the decision making and that you know and understand them. So you could say, for instance, to a candidate that they came back with 3 options for interviews, the Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. I know it's important for you to get this to move forward, so I assumed you'd want to go in on Monday and I confirmed that time for you. At the back end of the recruitment process, you can even get to the point with some candidates where you assume they want to accept an offer. So if you've got complete control all the way through the interview process, and the candidate has told you all the way through what their objections are, they've been handled, and you get to the point where they've said they will 100% accept a certain amount of money, be it a $500 a day rate, a £100,000 offer, and you get the offer in above that, you can tell them the client has extended the offer at this level, and I've assumed that you would want to accept. That would take the candidate and the momentum with you. Similarly with the client, you can say that they've come out of the interview and they've absolutely said they love it. I assume you want to make them an offer. Now you obviously have to have handled all the trial close questions and objections all the way through the process to make that final assumption. But that can actually help people make the decision easier if you know you've handled their objections. So that can be an assumptive close. You can take the position of assuming that they're definitely going to want to progress. It's dangerous if you don't know them very well, and if it's at the beginning of the process, you don't really have enough information to do it. But as you start to get to know the candidate and the client better, you can assume that they want to interview people or that they want to take the next step. With a client, for instance, if you send 3 CVs, you can call them up and say, look, I think this one and this one are great, I assume you're going to want to meet them. When's good for you? So you're just pushing the relationship forward and the decisions forward a little bit by assuming that you're right. Now I want to talk you through the concept of what's called a T-bar close. This is when someone's struggling with making a decision. Again, this could be early in the process or it could be late. So for instance, a candidate has got 2 offers, one of which is yours and one is another one, and they're struggling to make a decision between the 2. In order for this to be successful, you have to have positioned yourself not as someone who's a beneficiary of the decision, but someone who's here to help consult and ensure that they're making the right decision. But it is important that you remain in control of the T-bar close. So what you're effectively doing is a pros and cons of each option. So it's called a T-bar close because you draw a line across the top of the paper with both options and a line down the middle, and then you're going to go through with the candidate what the pros and cons of each one are. Now, if you send someone away to do a T-bar close, you lose control, and they may well find out when they look at the sheet of paper at the end of it that there are many more reasons to take the option that isn't yours. The way this remains powerful is if you sit down with them and ask them for a reason to take the alternative option, and every time they give you one reason, you make sure they're aware of 2 or 3 counter reasons to take your option. Visually, at the end of that process, you end up with a column of reasons to take your option that has a lot more information in it than a column of reasons to take the other one, and it looks like it makes the decision simple. Again, you have to be confident enough here that you have enough reasons to take your option over the other one. This can also work with clients who are unsure which candidate to take, and if you say, look, I can come and go through this with you and we can logically work through it. My rationale is to make sure that you make the best decision, so you'll continue to use me moving forward. So don't consider me as someone who has an interest in getting the candidate place. Consider me as someone who has an interest in making sure that you're making the right hiring decisions, and you'll continue to use me again. It takes a little bit of confidence to do this, and you have to know multiple reasons because it will backfire on you if you end up with a shorter column of information. So now we're going to look at a buying signs close. It'll take you a little bit of time to get used to what buying signs are, but for instance it would be when a client asks, does the candidate have this experience? What you need to do when you're recognizing those buying signs is use them as opportunities to close. So it might be worthwhile you saying, I'm not sure, let me find out. If they do, should we book in an interview? And get them to commit to yes. So then you can call them back with the interview availability of the candidate when you find out if they've got the skill set. So then you would call a client back and say, yes, they do have that skill set, so I've got their availability for you and they can come see you tomorrow. So that truncates the time in the process dramatically. Same with a candidate. If they're coming out of an interview and they say, oh, do you think they would offer this? You need to push for a close. If they did, would you accept? So as soon as you hear anybody asking a question that you could consider to be a buying sign, you need to use that to get confirmation that they would commit to something if you could confirm that information. Take you a little bit of time, as I mentioned, to pick up what all the buying signs are, but if you can get used to doing that and encountering each question with the ability to transfer to a close, you'll truncate the timeline in your processes and you'll stay much more in control. You can also truncate those timelines by using impending events as reasons to close. You can use, for instance, that a candidate has a final interview at another company, and if we can get the offer out before he attends that interview, they will cancel it and accept your offer. You can move, therefore, the pace of events and timelines forward by using a future event to close against. Similarly, with candidates going for interviews, we can say, look, we can book you in on this day. They have another candidate going in for final on that day, but they will cancel that process if you go in and accept beforehand. So we can use impending events to get people to commit sooner, and they also have a feeling of impending loss if they don't commit by that event, or potential loss. If necessary, we can create the impending event that we need to close against, or bring the timeline forwards to get the candidate or client to commit. Sometimes we need some sort of stimulus to get momentum back into the process, and we can use a possible event as a reason to bring the decision-making process forward. So at the end of any recruitment process, be it on a candidate or client side, before you go for a final close, it's worth asking the client or the candidate to be honest with you or to level with you about anything that could potentially impact the process of the deal. This enables you to find out any final objections before you actually go for the close. And if at any point the process has slowed down a little bit or they seem to be hesitating for some way, that's also a useful tool to flush out those final objections, because you're not asking them whether they're going to do something or not. You're just asking them to be honest with you about how they feel about potentially doing that. So it's an easier way for them to give you any concerns and flush them out so you can handle them than actually answering the final question. One of the things about closing is all the way through the process you're wanting to make sure that the candidate or the client continues to talk to you. If you put them under a pressure point anywhere along the stage of the process where you've lost their desire to communicate with you, you're no longer an advisor, you're a pushy salesperson, that's when you lose control. So these phrases like level with me or be honest with me or in your opinion and so on, they enable people to continue to talk to you without feeling like they've got to make a final decision. And only when you've got them in the place where you know they're 100% going to make the decision you want, you then ask them the difficult question that does put them in that position where they have to commit. Now finally, we have a direct closing question. So this is when you're confident that someone is going to accept, or you've ran out of all steam associated with handling any objections and you've got to get a final answer. When you're going to ask the client or the candidate, do you want to do this? So you've got to ask a client, are you going to make an offer? What's it going to be? Or you're going to ask the candidate, so now I've taken you through the offer, are you going to accept? Some of the times you won't need to do that because the client will already tell you and already lead into it. But also sometimes people are going to find it difficult to make that final commitment, so you have to ask them a direct question to say, do you want this? Are you going to do it? Which is a definitive yes or no answer. Again, if you've got the process right all the way through, you should have a fairly good idea what this answer is going to be, and if it is a no, it shouldn't be a surprise no, if you've built the relationship with them and managed the objections all the way through the process.